we all know, serendipity happens all the time. I was cleaning out this room, and this book fell off my shelf, and a picture came out, and I have no idea why the picture was in there, but it was a picture of myself when I was about 7 years old, and my cousin and my neighbor were on either side of me, and both had their Hopalong Cassidy outfits on. And, I'm looking at the crowd, and I said, oh, there's a lot of young ones. I don't know if you knew who he was, but he was the epitome of Cowboys. And it brought back floods of memories about my grandmother. When, Cowboys came, they were in the silent movies, then they were on radio. And for those of you who are definitely too young, but 1946 TV was developed. But people really didn't have TV sets until about 1950. So from radio, they went to television. And the popularity just boomed. What was interesting is that not only were you able to dress in the outfit of your favorite cowboy, but each cowboy, Hopalong, Cassidy, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and the Lone Ranger, they all had codes of conduct. So you would sit in your box tops and you would get this sheet. And it was interesting because all the codes were pretty much the same. You had to be honest, you had to be truthful, you had to obey your parents, be good in school, and study. And it always ended up with being a good citizen. But the Cowboys represented at that time, they were the local heroes. And they stood for honesty and integrity, and they were respected. Well, I would go over to my grandparents' home on Saturday with my dad, and he would help his brothers do yard work and clean up, because all the family got together on Saturday night at my grandparents' home. And there were probably about 40 of us, give or take. It was a big family. And my job was to go and help Grandma. Well, Grandma she was about 4'10", and at those days you always wore a dress, in the full apron. And she had hair that was way down past her waist, and she would just braid it and then, tie it up in a knot around her head. Well, I would open the door, and it would be like seventh heaven. The smell was unbelievable. Because by that time she had made her bread, she had made her nut rolls, she had made the coffee cake, she had made cakes and cookies galore. And I always used to laugh because she always had leftover dough, and this is what we had for Saturday lunch. It was in a cookie sheet pan. It was the dough and mashed potatoes and cheese on it, and she baked it. We thought that was seventh heaven. Well, as I said, I don't know, we got there like 8, 9 o'clock, but I'm not sure what time Grandma was up because everything was done. Sometimes she would be a little behind, so maybe I'd help with dishes or help with cleaning up, and that was about it. But my important job was at the stroke of 10. By my hand, we went into the living room. She sat down on the sofa, and my job was to turn on the TV and get it adjusted. And for those of you who don't remember, the screen was about 12 inches, and we're talking diagonal 12 inches, so a tiny thing. But they were in big consoles because, there was all these tubes, that ran the TV. But then you had to have the rabbit ear because that's what, in order to get the picture. There were only the 3 channels, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And all the Cowboys were on different channels. So that was my job, was to turn it on, adjust the antenna, and then I would sit down and we would watch. And of course it was Hopalong Cassidy the first. And that was my grandma's favorite because one of my uncles had taken her to see him when he was in town, so she had a signed picture of him, and she also had the code of conduct. And it was really interesting. She had it on her bureau with all the family pictures, there, but there was Hopalong. So she would just hoot and holler. She just loved it. Then after that was the Lone Ranger, and I had said to somebody, I said, I could still hear the sound, and to see him going, hi-ho, Silver, his horse would be raced up. And then, who else did we see? Oh, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. And of course, their horse, Topper. And then the final was Gene Autry. And Gene Autry, he would, in the middle of chasing bandits, would stop and get out his guitar and play a song. Well, Grandma would just beam away. She just thought it was great. And it was really interesting because there were only half-hour shows. There was a lot of action. And you always knew what was happening because the good guys wore white and the bad guys wore black.
Yes. No question.
Yeah, it was no question. And there were sometimes she would hit me and say, like, what are you doing? And and so I would explain it to her. So this was our best time. And we never told anybody what we were doing. Quote, we were supposed to be getting ready for the night, but it was a special time for me. And we did this, I don't know, for a good year or so. And then Grandma died quite suddenly. And a couple Saturdays after that, after she had died, we had gone over to their house. And my grandfather was sitting in the living room. Now, when we were watching, it was just Grandma and I. All the men were outside. And, and I said to him, I said, oh, Grandpa, do you want me to turn the TV on so you can watch the Cowboys? And he just said, no, he said, I just have fun watching you and Grandma watch them. That was your thing to do. But and the funny part about it is I can still hear his words, and he always had a twinkle in his eye too. And I'm looking at him and saying, Grandpa, you can speak English. And it wasn't until that time that I realized then I never had heard my grandparents speak English. They had immigrated from Czechoslovakia. Went through Ellis Island, went through 3 states, ended up in Detroit because of the auto and industry, and they preferred, to speak their native language. They had 8 children. Everybody spoke Slovak, but the grandchildren, we were Americans, and so, it was not the thing to do. But and I think about that too, and when I think about my grandma and. When I was young, and I said, how come I never knew that they didn't speak English? Because we always talked to them. But I was also really happy to know, too, that, Grandma's idea of America and justice and honesty was what she learned from the Cowboys. They were her heroes, and,